Hi, my name is Dominic Chambers, and today I'd like to talk about why I believe that payment platforms like Google Pay and also PayPal are eventually going to be replaced or made redundant by blockchain. Okay, so before I jump into the blockchain kind of aspect of that, let's start by talking about the problem with identity and authentication on the web, and why the web's model for identity and authentication is fairly broken. Okay, so if we go back to the beginning, you'll remember that when you used to log into websites, you'll use a different username, and you can never be sure when you use two websites that you'd always get the same username. So you could end up with a different identity being used at different platforms, which isn't great. Nowadays, most websites allow you to use an email address, and so that has the advantage that you get to maintain the same identity at different places for those websites that work that way. But you still have the problem with passwords, which is where the convenient thing to do would be to use the same password everywhere. But of course, that is massively insecure, as everyone knows, and so you're encouraged to use a different password everywhere. But you're also encouraged to use a strong password everywhere, which basically means a password which looks like gobbledygook. And so, this is impossible for users to really do this. We're just setting up people to fail. It's kind of impossible. So that has led to, the popularity of password managers, where you have one password manager where you have a password for that you can remember, and that thing knows all of your usernames and passwords across the web. So, I mean, this is very convenient. Maybe it's a bit more secure, but we're putting all of our faith into a third party to go and maintain that list of usernames and passwords, our accounts, our identity, and around the web. If that thing gets hacked, it's compromised, then the hacker has access to all of the websites that we use. More recently, we've seen the introduction of social login. So this is where you can log into a website using the user credentials you have already at one of the big kind of web apps like Facebook, Twitter, Google. So that's quite convenient. For those websites that support it, you get to use the same identity everywhere, and you're not required to create different passwords everywhere because you're just using that one system. But the problem here is you don't get to own your identity. It depends on you continuing to use that service. Well, what if you fall out of love with Facebook or Google, whatever it is? You don't want to use that platform anymore, but you kind of have to, because if you want to continue logging into these other websites that where you're using that as your identity, then you have no choice. So the system we have, the model for identity and authentication on the web, is fairly badly broken. Now, if you go and try the second generation or third generation cryptocurrency platforms, you're just going to have a completely different experience. So when I started using Ethereum, I was just blown away. One of the first things I found when I started using Ethereum apps is it's just so much more secure. You're finally able to have a system which is both really easy to use and really secure. So if you haven't tried it yourself, I'd highly recommend go and play with Ethereum. It's amazing. But if you haven't used it yourself, the big difference is when you use an Ethereum app, one of the first things it will do is it will detect that you have a crypto wallet, which is something you'll install. You're either going to use a software wallet, or you're going to use something like this, which is like a little hardware token that you use along with the software wallet. So the most popular one is software wallet is MetaMask, but actually in 2019 support for crypto wallets was even built into Opera and Brave. So this kind of way of working is taking off, and when you visit that application, it's going to know, you have a kind of like a digital identity that's available, and so it will ask for permission to know your identity. So it's not something it can do by default. And if you trust that application, then you can say, yeah, sure, you can see what my identity is. Now in this case, your digital identity isn't an email address, let's say, as it was before. It's a public key. And there are some consequences to allowing these applications to see your public key, which is that whereas, say, for example, on Ethereum, every single transaction you do, you can choose to do that with a different derived public key. It's derived from your master public key. And so that nobody looking at those transactions could know they're all related to a single person. Anyone that has access to the master public key would be able to know that. So there are some kind of implications to doing that. but provided you trust the application, that's all they can see. They can see, the transactions you've performed. Apart from that, if that web application has any sensitive data associated with you, it might want to know not only like, are you in possession of this thing? It wants to know that you have the password to make signing requests with that thing. So what it will do is it will want to prove that you actually do have permission to authorize requests. So they'll send like a random request with a kind of piece of random text, and you'll see here there's a little screen and 2 buttons, and you'll see a signing request come up, and it will say, do you want to allow to prove that you have ownership of this token? And so you say yes or you say no, and that's it. So that's the end of it. You have one digital identity across the entire kind of Ethereum ecosystem, which you own, you're in control of, not tied to a third party, and it's incredibly secure. It's not a question of using strong passwords. These are sort of like military grade strong passwords. So you finally feel, well, I did anyway. Once I started using Ethereum, I was like, wow, this is it. You have the convenience, and you have a system that's completely secure and it's completely within your control. Then you think, why doesn't the rest of the web work this way? We just kind of get used to how things work, and you kind of put up with it. But once you've used that, it just feels like it's kind of obvious that this is how the web should work. Also, what I think is that once enough other people have used a platform like Ethereum, they're going to come to the same conclusion, and they're going to start asking app developers, can we just log in with a hardware token like this? And it doesn't even need to be associated with one of your hardware wallet necessarily, because like a token like this, it can hold all your Bitcoin, it can hold all your Ethereum, it can hold all your Cardano, but it can also just be used as a signing token, which is completely unrelated to the other things. So it doesn't have to give away any information about you at all. It's just a really powerful and secure way of logging into platforms. Okay, so why do I think this is going to actually take off and replace, end up replacing the way we do authentication on the web? Well, I'm fairly convinced that blockchain, particularly third generation blockchain, is going to end up completely replacing the global financial system, just because it allows the same services that we already have to be produced much more cheaply, and also with less risk to the people consuming those services. So I have a video where I go into detail and talk about why I think that's the case. I'll link that here. Please go and take a look, and then come back, and hopefully I've convinced you that that is the case. Okay, so what does that leave? Well, if you agree with me that most people are going to end up using these kinds of platforms, there's going to become a dominant third generation blockchain platform that we're all using, then it seems obvious that all of the apps, even those apps that aren't blockchain apps, will at least look to use the same infrastructure for identity and authentication, since it's more convenient and more secure. Okay, what happens when that's true, when that's the case, that everyone's doing that? Well, one of the things is, if you're using like a token like this for logon, then there's no extra work for taking money, because the moment you've accepted this, like if, for example, suppose, you've accepted, if it's Cardano, you've accepted this as a sign-on, then you can just send a request for money. So if it's, if you're using Amazon or whatever, and you've bought something and you know the price, there's a little screen here, and when you've clicked pay, they can automatically send the request to your token, and you'll see the price come up, how much you're going to pay, who it's being paid to, Amazon in this case, and you either say yes or no, and that's it. And so suddenly anyone can do this. And the great thing with this is the transaction fees are much lower than you'll get with Google Pay or with PayPal, and anyone can use it. So even if it's just a small project, you don't have to go and apply to these people, go through any vetting. You can just use this straight away. So it seems obvious to me that although it's a long way away, I don't think the timeline for this happening is anytime soon. But this is where we're moving, and we're going to get to a place where the payment mechanism for the web becomes cryptocurrency, just because it's more convenient in terms of sign-in and authentication. So that's just my feeling about it. Maybe I've misunderstood something, I've got something wrong. I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments. Let me know what you think, and also if you have any other ideas for other videos kind of on these kinds of topics that I could talk about, let me know, and if it's something I feel I can talk about, then I'll happily look to make a video on that subject. Okay, thank you. Bye for now.